Hi and welcome to the Sunday Lunch Project podcast episode 36 for the 28th of October 2019. This is your host Nigel Creaser, and this month the Sunday Lunch Project Manager meets Dr. Mike Clayton, the online PM course guy. But first, a word from our sponsors. This month is not so much a sponsor, it's just a slot to support an event that I think is worth supporting. On the 7th of November, the PMI UK are hosting their Synergy event in London and celebrating the 50th anniversary of the PMI. The core theme is about surviving and thriving in a VUCA world, or VUCA world. Did I hear you say, Ashley? That's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I'll be attending and hoping to conduct a few roving reporter interviews with some of the attendees, and if the organisers will allow me to, a chat with them and some of the presenters too. I hope to bring that as a Sunday brunch episode so you guys can hear those interviews. If you are down there and you see me, I'm bound to have a badge on of some description. Say hi and let me know that you've had a listen to the podcast, and jump on. We can interview you for the podcast about how you are enjoying the course, the conference. If you just search for PMI Synergy on Google, you'll find all the details if you want to grab a ticket now. If you know anyone or are interested in sponsoring the show, then please get in touch at sundaylunchpmpod@nigelcreaser.com. If you're interested in sponsoring the show, then please get in touch at sundaylunchpmpod@nigelcreaser.com. So in the news, I said last month that I would be editing the project management, the interviews through October, but that's not happened. Basically, a number of reasons, not least that when I started it, I realised it was going to be a monumental task. The transcriptions need some tidying up in order before I can even start then cutting the transcriptions out to get to the nub of the interviews. So with my intent to take part in the NaNoWriMo event in November, drafting up my first novel, it means it's unlikely that I'll release the interviews before March next year. I'd have thought, by the time I've gone through, edited, cleaned up, tidied up, and formatted. So that's putting that stake in the ground by the end of March to get it out by then. The podcast interviews are coming along quite well now, and the upcoming episodes are November, we've got Ron Rosenhead. December, we've got Praveen Malik. And January, we have Sidar Oak. And then February, we have Emily Lujbrecht, which I probably said wrong. M the PM. I think I said it right on the interview, but I seem to have messed that up. You may have heard that we have had a couple of in-between interviews called the Saturday Brunch, where I'm trying to keep those to a half an hour, and they seem to be quite interesting. The next couple will be focusing on innovation, and the other on cybersecurity and how that applies to project management. In sort of personal update, I mentioned my judo escapades last month, and I did okay at the Veterans Commonwealth Championships. I was happy with my performance, but lost out to both the eventual bronze medalists, but performed better than I had at other competitions at that level. And then the weekend just gone, I fought at the British Masters, and again didn't come away with a medal, but I think I improved in performance, and this time losing out to the two finalists. So it was okay. I think that's probably enough from me for this month. I will hand you over to the interview. Thanks very much. Right, so today I'd like to welcome to the podcast Dr. Mike Clayton, who's a business author, conference speaker, facilitator, and trusted advisor. But as his website says, this is described what he does and not who he is. He described himself as a curious soul, committed to intellectual rigor, transparent communication, and highest professional standards. Formerly a senior manager with 12 years at Deloitte Consulting, Mike specialised in delivering an integration of complex change in diverse range of private and public sector organisations. His experience included roles in a 60 million programme for BAA PLC, 2 major projects within the Post Office, extensive infrastructure projects for Transport for London, and keystone projects for the MOD, General Motors, and local government. He was director responsible for the launch of a new business for Vodafone Management, working in and leading a wide variety of highly successful teams, has given Mike a valuable insight into organisational change, teamwork, and leadership skills. He presents a personal point of view and real tools from the 13 years of consulting and management experience. This is combined with knowledge gained from working and training with some outstanding leaders in business and personal development. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Glad to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
And it should be an entertaining time. So let's crack off with the first question. Where did Mike appear from? Where were you born?
Well, we need to have that conversation if no one's had it with you, Nigel. Or do you just mean the hospital name?
I just mean the geography rather than
the now defunct Royal Northern Hospital, which isn't as far north as it sounds. It's just slightly north of the river in London. So yeah, I was born in North London, grew up in North London, went to school in North London. So that's me, really. I'm a Londoner.
Right. So you're born in North London, yes.
Yep.
Isn't it? I thought everywhere above the Weltford Gap was north.
Yeah, that's what I say. It's North. I have no idea why it was called the Royal Northern Hospital, except possibly that it was quite close to the Northern Line, I suppose.
Yeah, well, that probably is. Yeah. So where, with you being there, where are you now? Are you still in that area, or
no? I moved out of London. What would it be? About 2002. I moved into the borders of Surrey and Kent. Technically Surrey, but you wouldn't know it looking at a map unless the border was marked. It's a little kind of cusp. But then 10 and a half years ago, with my wife, we moved to Hampshire, which is where I'm now sitting in the market town of Alresford, just outside Winchester.
Right. And for those people, I've got quite a few American listeners to the show.
That's the proper Winchester.
It's in the south part of England.
That's right. Yeah.
So you mentioned your wife there. Family, kids?
Yep. One wife, one child, one daughter, 10 years old.
10 years old.
You're what busy
about you? Then. 12 and 7, my girls.
All right. Oh, you've got girls too. Right.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yes, it's an interesting time.
Yeah.
The 12-year-old knocking on 13.
Yeah, we've got that to come.
Yeah, knocking on 27. So, yeah. So you mentioned that you grew up in London.
Yeah.
And when you were growing up in London, what did Dr. Mike Clayton want to be?
I wanted to be Dr. Mike Clayton for a start. I think my mother wanted the doctor more than I did, but no, I was always interested in science right from as far back as I can remember. But there was a TV series, and I'm going to date myself rather badly here for anyone who remembers it, called The Key to the Universe, which was about the then remarkable new discoveries in particle physics. Right. And I just decided that was for me. And I wanted to be a physics researcher and discover great new things. So that was the plan from about the age of 12, 13, very clear plan. Nearly came about, could have come about, but then changed my mind at some point.
All right. So that's it's the usual sort of thing. I've not heard someone who's at 10 or 12 said they want to be a project manager yet.
No, it isn't the sort of thing that comes up, is it? And it's a shame that one of the things I often say when I'm training people is that really and truly project management is one of those skills that ought to be taught properly at school, and not just call it a project and then have kids running around like lunatics trying to make something at the last minute. But teaching proper project management skills at school would be such a benefit to young people and to society.
Yeah, and I've had that conversation myself before. I think it's the organisation skills that every single thing you do around life it can be a project.
Yeah.
If you're painting the living room, if you're doing the garden, and the guys will have heard on other ones where I've talked about the fact that I tried to introduce a Kanban board into my family when doing some gardening stuff, which didn't quite work, so I made a different technique.
Oh, I created a very very kinesthetic, very Kanban board technique for my daughter. Actually, I basically got a piece of chalk. We've got these kind of flagstones which are covered in moss, and it's starting to eat into the mortar. So I wanted it off, and my knees aren't as good as they used to be. So I knelt down, and on each flagstone I wrote a sum of money, and I told my daughter that every time she cleaned the moss off, the last thing she could do was clean off the chalk and claim that sum of money.
That's a very good technique. I think I might use that.
But I did get warned by my wife that if when we were planning our wedding, that if she saw anything that resembled a Gantt chart, then the wedding would be off. So I used to work breakdown structure instead.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think we try to apply it. It becomes in it when we realise that I think it's partly to do with the fact that we get so used to thinking in that kind of manner that if you and that's the way our brains organise things now. And I find whether it's simple things of using a Trello to organise to keep our shopping list, using Trello to keep ideas of things, and it's just that's a good place, a good bucket to hold it into, and then you can take that and then start thinking, as you say, as a Gantt chart, you start thinking your dependencies, you start thinking, what have I got to do on that? And it just comes natural when you've done it for as long as we have.
Yeah.
Certainly as long as I have. So obviously you got completely obsessed with particle physics and education. What did you do then from that point of view?
So theoretical physics degree, PhD. Actually left the idea of particle physics behind for my PhD and went into low temperature physics. So researched liquid helium-3 in the A phase, for anyone listening who knows anything about low temperature physics, which possibly Glenn, if you're listening, that'll be you. And then for reasons that are still not completely clear in my mind, when I got offered a lectureship, I decided I wanted to try something different and decided to go into consultancy, management consultancy. And it's one of those that I think a lot of people can find one particular point in their life where they made a big decision which could have gone two ways, and always wonder. I haven't got any regrets about the choice I've made. Everything good in my life came as a result of the choice I made. But I've always wondered what my life would be like if I'd made the other choice, which was to accept the lectureship and become a full-time academic physics researcher. Where would I be now? Would I have a Nobel Prize?
Might be the next. You might have been the alternative Brian Cox.
Well, yes. Well, I did my PhD at Manchester, as it happens, and in fact, in the research group that's now headed by Andre Geim, who is a Nobel laureate. So, yes, things could have been different, but I'm very happy with my life as it is now.
That's the way to be, isn't it? It's kind of, you've got to, as you say, you get those moments of choice, and you've just got to. You jump with it and you go with it, and I found a number of the people I've spoken to, they've found a similar step where something either imposed or something as a choice of them has meant that what they were aiming at isn't where they've gone, but where they've ended up with the project management, they've applied the same energy, enthusiasm, and professionalism, for want of a better word, to the project management approach, and found that they get similar sort of rewards that they were getting doing the other thing.
Yeah, and I think that for me, I approach project management, I suppose, in a fairly rigorous, logical manner as I did science. So I think the scientific background has served me well. I think, yes, it is possible to be that kind of soft, cuddly project manager. And I've known people who really are not scientific in any way, shape or form. And some of their approaches I find frustrating, but they are equally as successful just by shifting their focus and making up the gaps that appear to me to be there in a different way. So and that's another thing that I love about project management, is the way that there's such a big wealth of tools and techniques and methodologies that there's room for every style.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you say that. With Colin, who was on the June episode, Colin Ellis. There's in his new book, the project book, he's got a section about different sort of types of project manager, and it maps on really closely, I think, to a model called the DISC model.
Yes.
Which some people are aware, some people aren't. I picked it up from a podcast called Manager Tools 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Probably actually before that, I'd read a book about it in another guise from another different person, but kind of got reintroduced to it later. And I find that it's those behavior tools, and it is, you will have, say, those 4 different ways of project management, and you will apply them. You've got your default manner, as you say there. You've got your scientific background that takes you down a certain level of detail and rigor that you would need to put in there. But also, I imagine that you lean on the other styles of project leadership when you need to in certain projects. Whilst it may not be your natural immediate go-to, I think we all change a little bit. Same with the normal behavior models of DISC, and it's kind of I find it interesting thinking of it that way, because you can. I am not a detailed person at times, but I can be very detailed and very precise. I'm a failed accountant, and and I can get down into that very detailed level. Yeah, it's not where I naturally live, but sometimes need to, and I have to remember need to.
I think that's. I mean, for me, anytime I hear anyone arguing that one way is right and another way is wrong, I immediately question their credibility, because, and it's not that I think compromise is such a fantastic approach. It's the fact that flexibility.
Yeah.
You have to have a variety of responses. Nothing frustrates me quite so much as the waterfall versus agile debate, because you get these kind of really fixed views on either side, and yet the reality. But I tell you,
I always go with that one. It's the screwdriver and a hammer. Yeah. You use the right tool.
Yeah. But if anyone likes the idea of a personality test for project management, but wants to have a bit of fun with it, not a serious, on my online PM courses website, there is a what is your project management personality quiz, which exposes 7, I think, personality types. It's not entirely serious, although everyone who's done it and given me feedback says it's spot on. It's not scientific. It is just a bit of fun, but it captures the nature of how people approach project management. And I have had people saying, have I got the right answers? And of course the answer to that is yes.
And
you haven't told me what personality you came out with, but it's the right one.
Yeah. Oh, but if you after this, if you ping me along across the link to that, I'll include it in the show notes for people so they can get a hold of that and have a listen, have a go at it.
Yeah.
And I'll do so myself as well. So when you moved into management consulting, what was it that dragged you into the bright lights of management consulting?
Well, I think when I was an undergraduate, as well as doing a physics degree, I was heavily involved with the student union, organising all the events, entertainments across the student body, and I kind of really like that, and I like the idea that you could take a big or a small event and you could plan it and you could make it happen, and there was a huge sense of satisfaction, and it was very real. And that was what kind of frightened me, and a bit about the research is that it was the long termness of it. Of course, then I didn't realize that, projects could last many years too. But the idea of doing a project and getting that kind of almost instant gratification and it all, so that's what attracted me to project management, was the possibility of taking on projects and advising people, and that kind of drew me in. And the more I learned about the project side of it, the more I gravitated towards project management as a specialism within consultancy.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense. So I'm just going to ask you a question that you just answered before I'd even asked it. You must be psychic. Is that one of your personality traits? I don't know. Just going on to that. So, sorry,
you were going to ask that question.
Yeah, exactly. So within your management consulting and within your initial PMing, so what sort of industries have you been in? I know I mentioned some earlier on. What are the industries have you worked within?
When I started in consulting, I was with a niche, small consultancy, and all our clients were in the local public sector. So local authorities were my main clients, housing associations to a degree, big NHS. At the time, they weren't trusts, they were regional regions and things like that. But then when my firm got bought out by what was at the time Touche Ross, then became Deloitte, it expanded out to central government, to voluntary sector, large international charities, but also manufacturing. I've worked in manufacturing industry, telecoms, financial services, consumer business, and transport sectors. That is I have to say that has been the best thing about both my career as a consultant and then as a trainer, training people across the UK, is the exposure to such a variety and diversity of different types of industry sector, whatever you call it, and the different people that come from those. So I've had some fantastic experiences and learned about so many different sectors.
Brilliant. Sounds like that diversity is always, I think, something that appealed to me within the project management arena, was that chance to get something new. And maybe that's my slightly flaky mentality of yes, I quite like that new shiny squirrel a project, because it's always I find that whilst getting the stuff over the line is good fun, and starting the project also is good fun. That bit in the middle sometimes can get a bit weary, can it?
Yeah, but that is I do find that exciting, that bit of learning the new environment. And it's a question I get asked a lot in training, because I do a lot of live training in the UK, and one of the commonest questions is, do you have to be an expert in whatever it is you're delivering as a project manager? And I think there are two answers that you'll hear, which is yes and no, but mine is very clearly no. Your expertise is in project management, as long as you've got A, the humility, but B, the kind of the technique of drawing in the experts that you need and listening to them and understanding how they can drive the technical side of it. You can then focus on really how do you coordinate all of that and make it all work, and how do you engage the stakeholders and manage the risk and stuff. So I've pretty much never delivered a project when I was with Deloitte where I was going in knowing the sector, and quite often knowing even knowing the technology or whatever behind the project. It was always something new and discovering that, and that's exciting.
Yeah, it is. I think and I'm in your camp with that thing. I think there may be some industries where you in certain levels, the knowledge of having that whether it's that sector or that technology knowledge starts to become very valuable when you're in things like and again supposition that the construction industry and the sort of major engineering industries, it's kind of starts to become an advantage there, because it's very detailed and very technical, and probably easier for you with the science background to be able to grasp them quicker than someone like me from a finance background. So
yeah,
and I think it does depend on the nature of the project, doesn't it? Because if you are building a bridge, there are a number of things that within building a bridge, a massive bridge across the river, is
there are things in there you just don't know you don't know.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the holes, and that's where, as you say, you absolutely need those good people who are specialists. And if you have, and I see it quite often, I find quite odd job advertisements for project manager slash architect slash business analyst, and it's kind of, which do you want?
Yeah. Well, there is that little bit of, I mean, I'm a huge believer that we shouldn't go too deep in our knowledge and expertise at the expense of breadth. But I don't think it's credible to claim that much depth across that much breadth. That is the jack of all trades, isn't it? And it's not plausible.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, what you do is, as you step into different roles in different industries, as part of project manager as being just common sense, is you go deeper while you're there.
Yeah.
And you mug up on the industry, you mug up on the technologies, and you get to know them. And as you say, you've got those experts around you. You sit with them and go, explain it to me in baby language so I can get an understanding properly.
Yeah, and when it is very technical, the reason for having those conversations isn't so that you can get by with that knowledge. It's so that when something hits you, you actually know which expert is the one to go to, or where the boundaries lie.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're not trying to become that expert. You're just trying to figure out who is the right expert for which issue, and that's always worked very well for me.
Yeah, and I think working out what the dumb question to ask is.
Yeah,
that's, if you know what the question is sometimes the hardest thing. Not knowing the answer. It's working out what question you should ask first.
Yeah.
So you went into the management consultancy, and you kind of was looking towards that project management role. What do you remember as being your first, as you remember it being a proper project that you were project managing?
The first one was, I do remember it. I don't remember any details of it, or what exactly for it, but it was a small property development. We were working for a local authority in Essex, and it was a small property development, and it was really helping them to manage the planning side and the capital expenditure side for their contributions. I can't remember much any more detail than that, but I do kind of remember in my mind some of the personalities involved, and I'm starting to understand that there was more to project management than just kind of keeping making a to-do list and stuff, which is kind of what I assumed it was. It was like my conception of project management then was, at that stage, was it's a to-do list and it's actually making sure you do everything on the list. And I thought that would pretty much get you through anything. I don't think I was far off, actually, but there are other wrinkles to it, and that's what I kind of started to learn at that stage.
Yeah, I've heard project management described as who does what by when.
Yeah.
and at its basic fundamental.
Yeah.
That's what it is, isn't it, really?
Yeah. Although curiously, at that time I didn't know the word stakeholder, but I was discovering then what stakeholders were and how powerful they are in terms of delivering or not projects. So it was great learning.
And they're elusive as well, I find. Yeah, there's always one stakeholder somewhere that will pop up just after when you needed them to have told you something, and you'll have one pop up going, but what about me?
Yeah.
And you think you've got everyone on board, and there's one that will pop up.
Yeah.
That was your first. What was your biggest project? And when I say biggest, what I don't mean necessarily is money, number of teams, what felt like the largest, and it might be impact on your customer, it might be impact on society, whatever definition of large meant to you, might be just personally big for you. And what did you learn from it?
I think probably it was the largest in just about any sense, and it certainly was the last major project I worked on before leaving Deloitte and moving into training. It had a huge impact on me and the way I think about many aspects of project management today. And it probably had the biggest impact on a chunk of the world. It was the congestion charge in London. So for listeners who aren't Londoners or aren't British, aren't aware, what would it have been? I suppose it would have been mid-90s. The then Mayor of London decided that to reduce congestion, he would impose, I think, the first citywide road user charging to try and reduce congestion in London. And Deloitte were appointed as the principal consultants and project managers for the project. I wasn't the project manager for the project. That was a chap called Brian Green, but I was brought on board to help with the master planning process, and then stayed on the team to lead the sort of sub project, I suppose. You could think of it as a program, I guess. So the component around the tender process. Right. And so that was a big project, obviously huge project. Came in at I suppose around £1 billion worth of capital expenditure. And I had a large team working for me on the commercial side. And so yeah, I guess that's the one. And I always felt particularly proud of that, because years earlier, in a conversation late at night, as you have, we were trying to figure out how do we solve the London transport traffic problems, and I'd suggested pedestrianising inside the Euston Road. Now, the congestion charge didn't go quite that far, but interestingly, that was the boundary of the zone. So I kind of called it years ahead. Yeah. And as a Londoner who preferred to travel around London by public transport, I'm very kind of proud of what that achieved for a while. Now traffic's bounced back, and we're probably back to where we were back at the turn of the century when it went live.
I don't know if I imagined this, but I'm sure I read something somewhere they were talking about having sort of vehicle-free weekends or weeks within the congestion charge area or around there, where they were going to actually fully shut the roads, or someone had proposed that, which kind of goes towards what you're saying there, is pedestrianised a lot, isn't it?
Well, it would. I mean, yeah, and actually there is a chunk of central London which, if you pedestrianised it and let buses and public service vehicles through, it could probably work. I think you'd have to find a way to allow commercial deliveries at some point, but I don't know. I'm not a policy wonk. Technically, I know that pretty much whatever you want can be made to work, because there are project managers out there and smart people who can figure it. But yeah, I think at the moment, I think the big game is on emissions charging now, isn't it? So
yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. So what did you learn from that? What was the biggest learning from that piece of work?
Well, it's interesting because when you interview Peter Taylor, and his famous contribution is the idea of the lazy project manager. Yeah. And when I first saw that, I felt that title, before I got to know Peter and read the book, I thought that doesn't sound particularly good. Rather like Project Management for Dummies, or the whole Dummies series, I thought was kind of insulting to readers. But until I discovered how well written quite a lot of them are. Yeah. But when I read Peter's thing, I thought, well, actually, this is something I've been talking to audiences about for a long time, but in a different way, because I got accused by my boss. I kind of discovered how to really let go as a project manager and let work streams and work stream leaders kind of run the project. Yeah. And I got accused of my boss of being complete waste of space. He said, Mike, why are we paying you? Every time I come past, I see you sitting on a sofa drinking coffee and chatting with one of the managers. What do you actually contribute to this project? I said, well, Richard, most of my contribution is sitting on this sofa drinking coffee, chatting with the managers, and thank you for your concern about my caffeine intake. But I kind of set up the whole of that kind of tender process to be modularized, with different experts running the evaluation of the different tenders, because there were, I think, about a dozen different major commissioning packages, some of which had to be commissioned in a joint way so that the technologies would work together.
Yeah.
But and I'd taken what I'd learned on previous projects in terms of getting the work stream leaders, who were the experts, to plan their work packages. I gave them the constraints and I said, figure out how you're going to deliver it and figure out how you're going to hit each of these milestones. And they did. And I then figured, well, once I'd done that, then actually when we get into delivery, my job is to make sure that they're sticking to their plan and help them out if they're not, and coordinate all their activities, but not actually get involved in them actively. And so I think I kind of make the joke that actually once you're in delivery, if you've done your job right as a project manager and your team are well supported, then you are going to spend quite a lot of time sitting on a sofa drinking coffee, which is a different way of expressing fundamentally the same insight that Peter's peddles far more successfully than I do.
It is, and I think it did touch some sort of logic with me when I haven't read Peter's book. And as you just said there, that whole point of you get the right people, you give them the right instruction, you give them that autonomy. And as as you say, those stream leads were kind of project managers. It's if you're not giving him that autonomy, and it's that people talk about the servant leadership thing, and I'm guessing a lot of your conversations there are right. What's stopping you doing this, and what's stopping you completing this, and how could you help?
Yeah,
to remove
absolutely.
those blockers, and they talk about the idea of the Scrum Master of removing impediments, and that's the same kind of role that you're doing there. Really, you're sitting there with those guys and going, "What do I need to do to help you do what you've committed to do properly and easily?" And rather than going, "Right, show me how you're doing every bleeding thing and let me tick everything off." And as I said before, me not being a detailed person, I think delegation is underused in project management. Is from what I've seen.
Yeah, and actually, interestingly, I created online courses not for the project management sphere, and then started selling them on my project management website. And the one that sells the best is the delegation one. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if I'm doing my job right, then I don't have to worry about how each of my work streams is going, because I've had a recent update, which means if one of them runs into problems, I should be aware enough that everything else is in a strong position to then turn my attention to doing what I can to help out. And in fact, I think the single biggest contribution I made to any of those work streams was when one of my team leaders said, I've we've messed up. We know we've got the numbers wrong, but we can't figure out where they've gone wrong. You're like this because you're an accountant. And of course, the thing about being in Deloitte is, although we were the consultancy, we did have some sisters and brothers in another building. And of course, so I could make myself useful by making a couple of phone calls. And within an hour, I had a highly experienced forensic accountant turning up in a taxi, and within an hour he'd found where the numbers were wrong, and it was a simple error, and he found it and it was all sorted. And so my contribution was finding the resource they needed. And I'm glad you mentioned servant leadership, because that is very much my thing in terms of the model of leadership that I like best, and that is the role of the servant leader, is to find the resources and to protect your team from the crap that organizations throw at them, so they can get on with their work.
Absolutely. So obviously that was your biggest piece, and it's saying the congestion charge, depending on your point of view, whatever, obviously a massive successful piece of work. What, on the flip side of that, what was your biggest screw up in your project management career? And and again, critically, what did you learn?
You learn more from your screw ups than you do from your successes, in truth. And I think the biggest one in terms of learning, I suppose there were two, but the one that was really a genuinely a project management screw up rather than a kind of professional screw up was coming straight out of like a lot of consultants, year 2000 project. I went straight into a brand new, let's build a web-based business project, and it was on incredibly tight timelines. It was based in Holland, and it had a team of about 80 people from our firm, and a lot of other people from other firms as well. But I went out to Holland to be launch director for this new venture, which was at the time owned by Mannesmann, but during the process, Mannesmann was bought by Vodafone, so it became a Vodafone project. And it was a huge project, huge, highly technical, highly complex project. A great example of a project where I turned up and I had absolutely no idea of any of the technology. It was over the course of several lunches and dinners with team leads and experts that I kind of got a sense of how it all fitted together. But my role was really just to bring all the different strands, the commercial, the technical, the marketing strands, all together into a kind of one project that we could monitor and oversee. It was more program management. But I've always wished that in those days, like we do now, I had a camera in my pocket, because I had the only time I've had an office as a consultant on a client site, an office to myself with us and my staff, and it had launch director on the door, which I just thought fantastic. I mean, I just wish I had a button on the desk, but it was very stressful. There was some interesting project politics, which we need not go into for reasons that have become obvious. But I felt I was under enormous stress. I was working long hours. Some of the team were local to the Netherlands or able to, reasonable commute to from Belgium. Some were flying in on 3 weeks on, 1 week off from places like Canada, the United States, Malaysia. But I was flying out on a weekly commute, getting the first flight out from City Airport, last flight back on a Friday evening. And typically I was getting into the office at 7 a.m. in order to try and get some work done before things got crazy. And I maxed out my credit card on pizzas, by buying the best part of 100 pizzas every night at around about 11 o'clock. So that was the kind of crazy thing. And it was just getting crazy, and I was under quite a lot of pressure to deliver, and there were one or two people who were looking for people to blame, frankly, for things that weren't going right. And not to put too fine a point on it, I cracked. I just couldn't hack it. At one point, I went into a bit of a meltdown, and the stress got to me, and for about 24 hours I was not much use to anybody. And luckily, I pulled myself together, and we actually delivered in every way that mattered to the client. We delivered, but it was at that point that I kind of realised I needed to learn a bit about the whole stress thing and how to avoid this ever happening to me again, and start to understand what was happening to the people around me as well. Which is fantastic, because although I've written 4 books on project management, I am a project manager to my core. My best-selling book to date is actually my book on stress management. And people say, how does a project manager come to write about stress management, about time management, about influence? And I say, well, actually, what is a project manager doing every day if once you've mastered the technical stuff of planning, it's influencing, it's managing time, it's managing your stress. So what I really learned there is the importance of looking after yourself and of being able to detect stress in yourself and your team, and to bring it back under control before it gets too crazy, or if it does get too crazy, actually understand what's going on and how to fix it. And all of that I learned out of that one experience, and the determination that it was never going to happen again to me.
Yeah.
It happens to people all over the world every day, but
yeah, and I think from the project managers, and I bang on about this, can be a lonely place as a project manager, because you are given a lot of autonomy, you're given a lot of rope, and you take responsibility for your team. And as you say, you're that shield from the organization for your team. So
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of getting pulled both ways, aren't you? And you're in that middle ground where you're not, whilst you're representing the organization, you don't have the absolute autonomy to do it how you want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But you know that you've got to kind of help your team get it done in spite of the organization sometimes.
Yeah.
And spotting your stress triggers is quite difficult if you're not paying attention. I've had a couple of points where I've gone through stress related instances, and one extreme case, and it was it scared me because I didn't spot it and I didn't realize. And I think quite often all of us as PMs, we deal with what's going on and we bottle it all up, and you don't take it home to your family, you don't share it with your boss, and it's just you and your little whirlwind in the middle there trying to be that sea of calm. I don't know how many analogies I just mixed up there. And you're trying to be that sea of calm for everyone, and it can, and as you just said there, it can immediately, you saying that you're doing flying out first flight on a Monday, last flight on a Friday, immediately my ears prick up and say that's not going to be good. And then you say you're doing 7 to 11, and then immediately you think, well, if you're looking at someone else doing that, you'd be going, hang on a minute, that's probably not the right thing to do, mate.
Yeah.
But when you're doing it, it's kind of, well, it's just temporary.
Yeah.
It's just for a bit.
But there's also the feeling, I mean, this was, what was this? This would have been about 19 years ago. So I was 19 years younger. And of course, there is a certain age range when you are still invincible. You're not, of course, but nobody's going to tell you that. And of course, there is that other thing, that kind of quite macho approach of some of the big consultancies and probably some of the big engineering firms, which is there is an expectation that people will, you're expected to go the extra mile, but what that actually means is actually run yourself into the ground. And so I think there is that whole conspiracy of the company and the expectations and your own ambition and your own sense of self identification as a bit of a hero. There are project managers that do have that kind of hero complex, that sense that I won't ask my team to do this, but I'll do it. And of course, if you are a good project manager and you have a loyal team, the thing you forget is that your team will go out their way to support you because you've worked hard to build that relationship with them. So you're not expecting them to go the extra mile, but sometimes leading from the front is actually dragging people into a bad place.
Yeah, because you set the stall, don't you? And if you're there from 7 till 10 o'clock, people around you see that as being the norm.
Yeah.
And whilst you're seeing it as being an exception for this and it's for me, other people tend to think, well, I should be, and it's not necessarily an explicit I should be, and they may not even realize they feel that, but it feels like and I was listening to, and it's a phrase Seth Godin uses a lot around people like us do this.
Yeah.
And that's what the project, you would set that stall, wouldn't you? And you'd be there going, I'm doing this. So they look at you and think, well, that's what we do on this project.
Yeah.
And it builds in there as a culture, doesn't it, without it being explicitly said. And then suddenly you find out, as you say, you're spending thousands of pounds on pizzas.
Yeah.
And which isn't ideal.
Yeah.
Going back to a more whilst actually that whole area of project management and stress is fascinates me, to be quite honest, on how we better deal with it and better protect our project managers. But going beyond that, what was your proudest project delivery? So of all the projects you've managed to get over the line, buying pizzas for everyone, whatever it needed to be done, and getting it over that line and going, yes, we did that.
Yeah, strangely, it's not the gift set of Domino's pizzas from the pizza company in The Hague. It's bizarre because I think there are lots of people who won't nowadays who won't actually recognise this, and people who were around at the time wonder whether it was all money well spent. But year 2000, I mean, every big consultancy had people out there doing it. I led the Deloitte contribution to the year 2000 program for BAA PLC, which at the time held 7 of the UK's, well, I would say 6 of the UK's largest airports and Southampton, plus airports around the world and all sorts of other interests. And I took on leadership of that project from Deloitte perspective, in interesting circumstances, let's say, and when it was seen by the firm as a project in serious risk, and I was asked to try and stabilize it, and we didn't just stabilize it, we turned it into a huge success commercially for our firm, but more importantly, and probably causally, a huge success for BAA. It went really smoothly for them, and given the amount of equipment and the amount of technology that their engineers found that did have potential year 2000 problems, the fact that there was probably fewer faults on the 1st of January than they would normally expect to deal with, it was a huge success. And I think for me, it was the first big project I got to manage, the first time I was working across such a breadth of different activities, different types of people. It's where I really crafted a lot of my understanding of what makes a good project manager, what makes a good team, what makes a good consultancy assignment as well. So yeah, and it transformed my career as well. My career wasn't going very far, very fast. Up until then, I was brought onto that as at the request of the client, as it happened, who'd met me and thought I really understood what it was they wanted, when the team leadership before that point didn't, and I turned that into the basis for pretty much everything I've done since.
Wow. So really, and I was around then. I was doing year 2000 projects myself within Barclays, and so the biggest newsworthy, I think that I remember newsworthy year 2000 millennium bug problems that people were worried about on the street were the planes falling out of the sky. And that was the big worry, or not landing properly, and that was
that was British Airways' problem. Planes falling out of the sky. But it's interesting because
if BAA weren't able to let them land,
yeah,
they'd soon fall out of the sky with no petrol. We know that from watching Die Hard, don't we? So,
well, I have to say seriously, I think the biggest single risk in terms of scale of risk, not necessarily potential outcome, because although it would have been a press publicity nightmare, nobody would have got hurt. But actually, the things that where there were most engineering concerns found was the baggage handling systems. They are so complex. But I tell you, that planes falling out of the sky thing, it reminds me, one of the things I always tell people is, if you're a project manager, is you need to carve time out of your week, even if it's only half an hour, to find somewhere quiet and just think, and just let all of the things you've heard over the last week, all the concerns, just bubble to the surface. You need a bit of quiet time. And I created this ritual of marking myself as being in meeting room 5, because we were working at Gatwick Airport at the time. And one of my friends, our colleagues, said, we were trying to find you, and we've discovered there is no meeting room 5. Where are you? It's Costa Coffee, actually. But I was sitting there, not really coming up with anything insightful, and I heard someone on the phone booking a ski holiday. This was a couple of years out, and it suddenly occurred to me that I'd heard in a meeting just that week something that surprised me, which is the biggest fly day, certainly back then, for a number of the UK airports, is not over the summer. It is the 1st of January, because that's when people go on their skiing holidays. And I just thought, if I phoned up the airport and said, I'm planning to book a skiing holiday, but I'm worried that it won't be safe because of the Millennium Bug, I wonder what they would say. So I went back to the office and I used my mobile rather than the office phone. I didn't use the internal directory. I just phone directory inquiries, said I want to speak to Gatwick. So I got on the phone to Gatwick and I said, some call handler picked up the phone. I said, I'm thinking of flying, and she went silent. I said, is it going to be safe to fly? And she went silent. And then she said, well, I expect it will be, but I wouldn't. And I thought to myself, I'm not sure that that's actually what corporate HQ would want them to be saying. And that kicked off a whole new work stream. And it was just because I'd spent that half an hour not doing anything that, it had this completely new work stream. And over the course of 6 months or so, we managed to get everyone trained with scripts that were approved by engineering and by legal. And every quarter we reviewed those scripts and revised them as and when we had new information. So I think that, and it's those little learnings that I had so many of them over the course of what was for me a 2.5 year project, and so many different experiences that I kind of crafted a lot of my understanding there.
Yeah, it's fascinating that, because it's that ability to reach beyond the project scope and go, what is the business impact? What is going to happen to the business? Yeah. And as you say there, if not picking up that, not spotting that point, and if left as it was, obviously BAA, the way they get their money is payments for everyone that goes through the airport.
Yeah.
And therefore, if on their busiest day, as you say, it's like New Year's Eve at anywhere that sells Christmas presents for blokes to buy for their wives.
Yeah.
That's their biggest day, isn't it? So not spotting that makes a massive business impact, not just the project, tick the box, we've delivered the project.
Yeah.
Moving kind of slightly different angle on your own achievements.
Yeah.
And thinking about what your proudest project achievement was, not necessarily related to the delivery, but something that wasn't about, yes, we made that project go live. What, during your course of being the PM on these pieces of work, what is the thing that you found that given you the most pride?
I once told a story, and I just kind of publicized a bit of it on social media, and I didn't actually say what the story was, but I kind of attributed the success I had to one of my former colleagues, and he emailed me and said, I have no idea what I've said to you that you felt was so influential, but there's a chap called Rex McCrill, who I think now is very successful executive coach, and he and I had fairly parallel trajectories at Deloitte, and he was at the time had started running a project for the Ministry of Defence somewhat before I'd moved on to the project I was doing, and we met up, and one of the things he said is, now you're running a good project, you've got a real responsibility to do something with that success. Don't just kind of bank the success, but actually you've got a stable, successful project. Do good. And shortly after that conversation, I got a phone call from the resourcing people. So at Deloitte, and I guess all the big consultancies, you need a resource. You ask the resourcing people to find you someone to fit a template in terms of seniority, experience, expertise, whatever. And so I put in my request, and they phoned up and said, we've got someone, but I have to say, he's not well liked. He has, a number of his assignment managers feel that he's let them down, whatever. And so we're going to be asking you to keep an eye on him, and because this is his last chance. And my heart sank for a moment. I thought, okay, well, let's see what. I said, the guy turned, and I sat him down and I said, look, I don't know if you know, but you come with a health warning. And he said, not really surprised about that. And I said, look, cards on the table. This is what I've been told. So you've got a choice. If you carry on like that, you won't be on this project for much longer, and I'm fairly sure this will be your last project. But if you say to me now you want to change that perception, I will help you to change that perception. I will help you to do a good job, and I will therefore be able to say in good faith that you've done a good job, and we can start to turn this all around. And he said that's what he wanted, and we. The great thing was that when he rolled off that project, he was the only team member on that entire project who got a letter of thanks from the client. So that made me enormously proud. Partly it made me proud of him. And if I'm absolutely brutally honest about it, partly it made me proud that I actually did the right thing when it would have been actually much easier to say, well, I'll wait, I'll get someone else. But I didn't. And so I'm kind of proud of myself as well. But the principle works. And that's, all credit to Rex for kind of pointing out to me that we can do that as successful project managers. If we create some space on our projects, we can start to invest in our people or whatever else needs our investment.
Absolutely. I think it's absolutely spot on. Moving now through, we've kind of covered the history of your project management, and I know that obviously you're doing other things now, and looking on your website, there's a whole raft of it. So what made you move away from the delivery of project management and then into the other roles and setting up your own business and the books, the speaking, blogging, etc., etc., etc.?
I think it's it all comes down to philosophy of around the work I was doing. As we kind of came towards the end of the 90s into the early 21st century, I was very clearly, with a number of other colleagues at Deloitte, kind of mentally aligned to the idea of integrating two of our service lines. We had a service line which we called program leadership, which was project to program management and all the good things that you and I know how to do. And there was another service line which was called change leadership, or which was the management of change, all the softer skills. And I had come firmly to the conclusion, as had a number of my colleagues, on both sides of that divide between two service lines, that actually we were really talking about two ends of a spectrum rather than two distinct disciplines. Mm-hmm. And that you can't be successful in delivering change unless you can manage a project, and you can't be delivering a successfully deliver a project unless you can manage the change aspects of it. And you have to be able to play across the whole spectrum. And sure, there are always going to be people who are going to be most comfortable at one end of the spectrum or the other, but I saw it as being very much what I thought we should be doing to bring those two services lines together, integrate them more closely. But around the 2001, 2002, it was quite clear that Deloitte at that time saw their future or their immediate future in enterprise resource planning, ERP implementations, in big IT implementations using those tools plus all the web tools. And the message they were getting from their clients was they wanted project managers who could make technology projects work, and they weren't interested in all the soft side of it. They just wanted the kit to work. And I was earmarked as one of the project managers who would be very, very capable at delivering that stuff, albeit not a technologist. And that's what the firm wanted me to do. It wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And interestingly, having had conversations, that's pretty much the way the firm, and I suspect pretty much all of the big consultants have moved, is much closer integration of those disciplines, because it makes sense. But it wasn't right for me to stay on. The terms they wanted me to stay on and I think weren't right. So I felt I had to leave, and having made the decision that I wasn't going to stay on. I also made the decision not to stay on doing project management. I loved doing training. I'd trained project managers at Deloitte's for a good number of years. I'd done all the kind of landmark training for the big promotions that people got. I was involved in those training courses internationally. So I wanted to get involved in training. So that's how I came to kind of set myself up as an independent trainer and start pretty much from nothing.
All right. That must have been an exciting project.
Pretty hairy one. I mean, it was 6 months before I actually, won my first engagement, and I kind of used the promise of my first income to buy the laptop I'd need to project the slides from. So it was an interesting period. Yeah. But I learned the art and craft of cold calling, which is something I never want to go back to. But yeah, you do what you need to do, and my business grew from there.
Brilliant. I've got a few final questions, but before we go into that one, the sort of last flow out that I have there, what do you, something I need to write it higher up in me interview things, is what do you do when you're not teaching people to project managing?
You mean what else am I teaching them, or what do I do when I'm not working?
When you're not working, yeah. What do you do?
Working, it's mostly the family. But I'll tell you, the thing that I've been doing most of work-wise over the last few years is putting my training courses onto video, and I have become a bit of a hobbyist film editor, and started to get into motion graphics as well. So that's actually quite fun, and playing around with video equipment and learning how to edit videos and stuff. That's occupying quite a lot of my time as well. But yeah, you've got a couple of daughters. They're pretty at that age. They're pretty all-consuming. I think she's starting to get to the age where I can get a bit more time to myself, and my wife can get a bit more time to herself. But still a big draw on our time.
Yeah, I understand that. What was the last project podcast that you listened to?
Yeah, the last one I listened to was you and Peter Taylor, because I saw him there and I thought, he's always entertaining. I'll have a listen, get his story.
Yeah, with his especially with his, he's got his 10-year anniversary this year, isn't he, with the book as well. So I think he's always entertaining. And what about the last project blog? What do you read?
At the moment, actually, I must confess, I tend to write far more than I read. Finally, I read quite a lot of, not blogs, but I rushed out a blog just yesterday about the new PMP exam that was PMP announced a week or so ago, and that required me to. And funnily enough, I think I may not be the first person to blog on it, but I couldn't find anyone else. So because I was looking for that, but I tend to. I'm going to forget the chap's name now. It's going to annoy. Dave Gordon produces a digest of blogs every week, and I don't know how he does it. Amazing, but there's usually about 20 really good quality blogs that he's found and has summarized in one sentence, and I just kind of browse that every week, looking for one or two that attract me. So I'm not a kind of faithful reader of any particular blogs, although interestingly I'm starting to think of a kind of little project around other people's blogs that I can start for my own audience. But yeah, so I have no idea what the last one of his. I think probably the last one I do remember that I did relatively recently. This isn't the last one, but the one that stuck in my mind was, again, a very kind of high-power agilist talking about how he's been appointed to help lead the team that's going to produce the next PMBOK, and saying that's going to be a very different beast to the current one. So anyone, any PMPs out there, agile is going to be a much bigger thing for the PMI.
Yeah, well, yeah, it makes sense. It's another tool that we're using, and it's used extensively, isn't it? So
Yeah.
And I think it's as we discussed earlier, it's a good hammer.
Yeah.
When you're hammering in a nail.
Yeah. My only problem is it's not a hammer I learned to use while I was actively managing projects because it didn't exist.
Yeah.
Although I do take issue with Agilists saying, "Well, this is all new." We were doing incremental and iterative stuff back in the 90s, and I'm sure.
Yeah, Rupp.
I'm sure the
Rupp was
pyramids
there, wasn't
weren't
it?
built in one go.
No. Was
They
it
were-
Rational Rose and all that stuff was
Oh
around
yeah,
then, wasn't it?
rads and yeah. But even just in traditional predictive project management, we would still aim to release our project in chunks and review as we went. So I probably know more agile than I think I do. I think if I probably examine it, it's an overlay of techniques and methodologies around quite a familiar ground.
Yeah, from my experience of it, and the training has been my main experience with a little bit of trying to apply it, and it is I find it really, really good when applied to the right thing. I think it's so on that, just thinking about the last couple of questions here was, what would be the top tip that you'd give to a seasoned project manager out there? Just that one tip to someone who's been 10, 15 years in project management. What would you say to them?
Yeah, when you asked me to do this and you gave me some hints about some of the questions you might ask, and you hinted that you'd ask this, and actually in my mind I was going to talk about servant leadership, and we've blown that one out of the water. So the one rule that I always tell people starting out, but I think we need to remember it as seasoned project managers, is that it's your stakeholders that will determine the outcome of your project, not in terms of what happens, but how it's perceived, and therefore whether it's a success or not. You can build everything you promised to build, and you can build it as well or better than you committed to building it. And you can bring it in on time and under budget, but if your stakeholders don't like it, it's a failure. And so it's not a tip in terms of giving people advice they've never heard before. It's a urgent reminder that you are never giving enough time to engaging respectfully with your stakeholders. So that, I think we're going to go with that one, given that we've done servant leadership to death.
Fair enough. And the final question of the day: what would you tell young Dr. Mike when he's just stepped into that first project, on that first day in project management at, where was it? I'm trying to remember. I've got it written down. Congestion charge, wasn't it?
No, that wasn't the first one.
No, the local authority one.
That's
sorry.
right, the one in Essex.
Yeah. So in that property developers, and you've gone down there your first day with your bright, clean, shiny project book and your shiny shoes and briefcase, I guess. Back in the day. What would you say to Mike?
Actually, I'll probably say two things. I think there's one thing I did well, which I think I should have done well, and I would say to myself anyway, which is to use your project management experiences as a platform for learning about all sorts of different disciplines, like stress management, like time management, like influence and communication, and all of the different skills which aren't, strictly speaking, project management skills, but without which we cannot manage a project. The thing that I didn't do well, nearly as well as I could or should have done, which is also to use project management as a platform for building a network. Really and truly, I got on with the projects and I delivered the projects and I engaged with stakeholders purely around their project, and therefore didn't take nearly enough of those relationships on beyond the duration of the project, which is a matter of some regret. So that those would be my two. Actually, I'm going to give you a bonus because we're talking about Pinbox 7 coming out. I mean, I don't know if you're PMP, if you've read, but I got Pinbox 6 in a post, and it's just this massive great thing. The one tip I would say absolutely. To the younger Mike, which I'm afraid is not a tip that's available to any new project managers listening, although it probably is just as valid, is get your PMP in now. Because if I'd have done my PMP in 1996, when I got the first edition of the Pinbock, I still got it. Still got it on my desk. It's 174 pages, and it makes sense, and it's printed on white paper. So if you're a project manager now and you're thinking about doing your PMP because you see a career ahead of you, do it now. It's only about 600 pages. By the time you're my age, it will probably be about 900 pages, and it will be only available plugging straight into your brain.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I know. I think it was 2002 when I did mine, so I'm glad I did it
back then. Edition, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Well, that is my questions. That's everything that I was planning to ask and more. If people want to get in touch, catch up, grab one of your books, get in touch with you, some of your training, what's the best way for people to get hold of you?
Okay, if they're interested in project management, as your audience are, the place to go is onlinepmcourses.com.
Mm-hmm.
I sell all sorts of project management courses there. My own core courses for people who need to do traditional plan project management. I sell soft skills courses that are relevant to project managers, like managing change and delegating leadership. But I also have certification courses for things like PMP and Scrum as well on there. So there's agile courses too, and lots of free stuff as well. There's a weekly article which is a big read, and may not be right for people with lots and lots of experience and knowledge, but certainly for there's a lot of good stuff there. Attached to that, there's the YouTube channel. I do videos every week on YouTube. Look out for online PM courses on YouTube as well, and all the usual channels, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect with people. And if you're a member of the Association for Project Management, APM, here in the UK, then look out for my article in every quarterly edition. You'll find a one-page thought piece from me, and I think the summer edition must be out fairly soon.
Right, cool. That's brilliant. Finally, then, thank you, Mike, for your time and your interesting and entertaining stories. There's some fascinating stuff in there. And have a wonderful evening.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for hosting me.
No problem. Thanks, Mike. Cheers now.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Many thanks to Mike for a great interview. And if you know anyone who would like to be interviewed, whether it be for one of these interview podcasts or for one of the Saturday brunch shorter versions, then get them to ping me a message at sundaylunchpmpod@nigelcreaser.com. If you've got questions and comments or whatever, ping me to the same address or grab me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all with the handle SundayLunchPM. And if you'd like to support the show, as ever, you can ping it out to your friends and colleagues and tell them all about it and how wonderful it is. Give me a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to. Buy a copy of one of the books, or just pop along to Patreon and you can support us there. But obviously, I say it every month, but the most important thing is for you guys to come back and carry on listening. I hope you enjoy it. And remember, #project management is funny.
Well, it's goodbye from me, Nigel Creaser, and it's goodbye from him, the Sunday Lunch PM. Goodbye.